අද්විතීය 200 Mbps ස්පීඩ් එකකින් ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ වේගවත්ම සහ පුළුල්තම හෝම් බ්‍රෝඩ්බෑන්ඩ් සම්බන්ධතාවය වන SLT මොබිටෙල් දේශීය ෆයිබර් බලවේගය ඔබත් අදම අත්විඳින්න.
හරිම සුදුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Friday the 24th of March 2023. Vital talks. Sri Lankan officials to hold virtual presentation with investors next week on progress of IMF program. Oversight. Former Central Bank Governor Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy says the new unit to oversee the implementation of the IMF program reforms are needed.
So this implementation unit, we need to get it set up. It needs to have the authority to reach out to any part of government and get things done. And it should have the authority of the president behind it.
Protection. Governor of the Central Bank Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe expressed confidence in protecting the country's banking system.
Alliance Finance මෙතුරු රන්නයි සේවාවෙන් රන් පවුම්කට රුපියල් 1,70,000ක ඉහළ අධිකාරමක්.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දිනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Andrew Bernard. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. In your top story for tonight, Sri Lanka is expected to hold a virtual presentation next week to update the commercial creditors and investors following the receipt of IMF Executive Board approval for the bailout package. According to the Ministry of Finance, Economic Stabilization and National Policies, the presentation will outline the extended fund facility supported programs, objectives, as well as the next steps with regard to engagement with creditors. The ministry reiterated Sri Lanka's commitment to successfully complete the IMF-supported program and added that the government has embarked on an ambitious program agenda to ensure fiscal consolidation, boost tax revenues, rebuild its foreign reserves, improve economic governance and strengthen the central bank's independence. The Ministry of Finance, Economic Stabilization and National Policies of Sri Lanka will be holding a virtual presentation on the 30th of March to update Sri Lanka's commercial creditors and investors following the IMF Executive Board approval of Sri Lanka's IMF program under the Extended Fund Facility on the 20th of March. The presentation will be chaired by the Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, and the Treasury Secretary Mahinda Siriwardana will outline the EFF-supported program's objectives as well as next steps with regard to engagement with creditors. Issuing a statement, the Ministry of Finance said Sri Lanka is fully committed to successfully completing its IMF program and added that Sri Lankan government has embarked on an ambitious reform agenda to ensure fiscal consolidation, boost tax revenues, rebuild its foreign reserves, improve economic governance, and strengthen the central bank's independence. The Finance Minister said Sri Lanka will continue to engage with all its creditors in good faith with full transparency and looks forward to constructive discussion with a swift resolution of the public debt situation. Expressing his views, Treasury Secretary Mahinda Siriwardana said the IMF Executive Board approval is an important milestone towards Sri Lanka's debt sustainability and economic recovery, unlocking up to $7 billion in funding from the IMF and other international financial institutions. He said Sri Lanka remains committed to progressing engagement with all our creditors to achieve an efficient, transparent and equitable implementation of the debt treatment required to restore debt sustainability. Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe said Sri Lanka is strongly committed to successfully completing the IMF program by implementing ambitious reforms. He also expressed his confidence in successfully completing the IMF program and restoring the Sri Lankan economy. Now, the Sri Lankan government has repaid the first installment of the $121 million of the Indian credit line obtained last year. According to State Minister of Finance Ranjit Simalapitiya, the installment was paid off using funds received to the first tranche of the IMF bailout package, amounting to $330 million. He said the Finance Ministry settled the payment yesterday. Yesterday, Secretary to the Ministry of Finance Mahinda Siriwardana confirmed that Sri Lanka received the first tranche of the $130 million from the IMF. A former central bank Indrajit Kumaraswamy says that the governor should immediately focus on establishment of a unit to oversee the International Monetary Fund supported program. Addressing a webinar organized by the Center for Banking Studies on IMF What's Next, Kumaraswamy highlighted that the importance of maintaining discipline along with proper implementation in order to reap benefits.
Three most important priorities going forward are going to be implementation, implementation, and implementation. That has always been a weakness for us. So we need to have a laser-like focus on implementation and go through with the program. Because if the program gets suspended, it would have pretty dramatic consequences. So we need to keep it on track, and we cannot relax. We cannot think that we have achieved more than we really have, and we cannot give up the absolutely compelling need for discipline in a way we have never exercised discipline before. When you say what is next for Sri Lanka in the wake of the IMF program, it is discipline and a very different way of making economic policy and in terms of implementing what we have agreed to do. So we have to do things differently and maintain discipline. When the global financial crisis hit Ireland and they had to go into an IMF program, what the Irish did, they were very meticulous in the way they set up an implementation framework. They identified all the actions that had to be taken, and some actions they even split because more than one authority was responsible for it, and then had this matrix where you had the actions and the sub-actions, and each of those was ascribed to a particular government entity to implement. And this particular unit reported directly to the Irish Prime Minister, who's the head of government in Ireland, and the cabinet. And the reporting happened once a month. And wherever there were bottlenecks or impediments which were constraining the implementation of any aspect of the program, those were immediately dealt with. And so we need to have the same degree of focus, absolutely a laser-like focus on implementation. We need to figure out what has to be done and then ascribe a responsibility for each of the actions and monitor very carefully how we're going about it, and to make sure that we are hitting all the targets and the structural benchmarks as we go along. Because these targets and structural benchmarks are embedded in the IMF program. And as we go forward, we need to make sure that we keep on track. So this implementation unit, which I think the president was very interested in, we need to get it set up, and it needs to be functioning. And we need a very good person who has the authority to basically reach out to any part of government and get things done. And it should have the authority of the president behind it. Another thing that we need to look at is now we've got to the point where there will be a different type of focus on the debt restructuring. Up to now, the focus has been on getting assurances of financing from the bilateral donors and an endorsement from the commercial creditors that we are cooperating with them, and there is progress being made in terms of addressing the commercial credit that needs to be restructured as well. So far, I think great deal of credit has to be given to everybody concerned, that we've got to where we are, all of them in pretty generous terms. There is a great commitment to assist Sri Lanka to get out of this mess. And we need to now demonstrate that we actually deserve it by showing discipline and commitment on our side. And on the commercial credit side too, it's unprecedented, as far as I know, for commercial creditors to issue the kind of statement that the commercial creditors did about, I think, maybe now a couple of months ago or 6 weeks ago, to say that they are happy to collaborate with Sri Lanka and to work with Sri Lanka to complete the restructuring of the commercial debt. So that's something that's unusual.
Now, in Parliament today, parliamentarians of the Samgi Janabalawege, Rauf Hakim says that reform implementation cannot be ignored in a backdrop where the economy has hit the rock bottom. He said that the government has failed to implement reforms appropriately during the past 16 programs negotiated with the International Monetary Fund. Meanwhile, opposition leader Sajid Premadasa once again urged the government to release the funds necessary to hold the local government election.
මැතිවරණය ක්‍රියාත්මක කරන්න. එක දවසක රාජ්‍ය වියදම. ඉන්ටරිම් ඕඩර් එකක් දීලා තියෙනවා රංජිත් මද්දුම් බණ්ඩාර මැතිතුමාගේ ඉදිරිපත් වීම තුල ශ්‍රේෂ්ඨාධිකරණය. මුදල් ටික වෙන් කරනවද මුදල් ටික ලබා දෙනවද නැද්ද? yes or no උත්තරයක් දෙන්න ගරු අගමැතිතුමනි.
මේ පිළිබඳව මැතිවරණ කොමිසම ප්‍රකාශයක් කරලා තිබෙනවා. මේ ප්‍රකාශයත් අවසානයක් නැති ප්‍රකාශයක්. ඉතින් ඒක තමයි මම අහන්නේ. මම අමාත්‍යවරයා හැටියට ඒ අය කැඳවන්න බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා. නමුත් කොමිසම කැඳවුවාම කියනවා කොමිසමට බලපෑමක් කරනවා. මේ සභාවෙම ප්‍රකාශ කරා. කොමිසමේ සියලු දෙනා ඊද මන් දන්නේ නැහැ. මම ඉදිරි දවස්වල ඉක්තා ඉක්මනින් කැඳවලා සාකච්ඡා කරන්න බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා.
දැන් තමුන්නාසට IMF එකනුත් මුදල් ලැබිලා තියෙනවා. මේක බොහොම සුළු මුදලක්. මම දැනගන්න කැමති අගමැතිතුමාගෙන් කවද්ද මේ මුදල් ලබලා දෙන්න කටයුතු කරන්නේ.
උත්තරයක් දුන්නා. ඊට වඩා උත්තරයක් නැහැ. කොච්චර කෑ ගැහුවත් නමුත් ඊට වඩා උත්තරයක් නැහැ. අපි අධිකරණයට ගියේ නැහැ කිසිම අවස්ථාවක. අධිකරණයට ගිහලා මේ ප්‍රශ්න විසඳ ගන්න හැදුවේ ඔබතුමාලා.
Listening to the debate the last couple of days, both inside and outside Parliament, regarding the IMF package, what appears is that the supporters of the IMF reform process seem to be asking the people of this country as well as members of this Parliament to choose between democracy and the economy. It's an extremely false distinction that is being made, as if somehow the economy is above everything else and as if the economy and decisions about the economy are devoid of any kind of political significance or political meaning. And we are being constantly told that at this moment the economy has to take priority and that suspending democratic freedoms, democratic privileges is almost essential in order for these economic reforms that are being proposed to take place. This is a extremely dangerous precedent and extremely dangerous approach that is being currently proposed. Within the IMF package, there are deep structural reforms that are being proposed which need to be discussed, which need the people's consent, which needs people's mandate in order to be effectively implemented, if at all. For instance, there are tax reforms that are being proposed which affect different layers of the society in different ways.
මේකට සියලු දෙනාගේම සහාය අවශ්‍යයි. මේ වැඩපිළිවෙල සඳහා පෞද්ගලිකව මම නම් සහාය දෙනවා.
Earlier engaged with the IMF, this exercise of being in this merry-go-round of going for reforms, thereafter again regressing from the reforms, then once again running in a crisis situation back to the IMF asking for their facilities has been a merry-go-round. Now we are once again finally with this 17th attempt, will we succeed is a question. Now we have always been involved in some cosmetic compliance and have, whenever crisis abates, we have been used to going back to business as usual. We cannot afford to do this regressing from our undertakings anymore. We have gone to the rock bottom. The country had been declared bankrupt. So with such an ignominy, we cannot afford once again to regress from the reform path that we have set ourselves.
If you look at the events that took place for the past 1 year, you would have noticed that the opposition was quite vocal on the fact that IMF will not come, fuel issue is not going to get over, electricity issue is not going to get over. And fortunately, the president proved them wrong. And also, one more instance I'd like to say. Now, since IMF has come on board, the opposition, certain members, I'm not going to put that stain on all the members, but certain members lose their sense of decorum and they tend to bring up the past. You know, to be more specific, the bond scam allegation. See, I think we need to look at this with a bit of common sense. I think we should stop misleading the people with false narratives and we should actually talk about what is at stake right now. The reason we are in this mess is because of the continuous lies fed to the people by politicians for a long period of time, where they promised the people heaven and all the subsidies with it. But what they didn't tell the people is they're stealing right from under their feet.
Stay with us for more news right after this short commercial break.
ගොඩමඩ පෙරලි කරන බලපුළුවන් කාරයා මහින්ද්‍රා යුවෝ ටීමෝ වෙතින්.
Welcome back. Now, Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe expresses confidence in maintaining stability in the country's banking system. Addressing an event in Colombo, the Central Bank Governor said that the support of commercial banks towards the central bank reforms is critical at this juncture. The 35th anniversary of Ceylon Bank was held in Colombo today under the patronage of Central Bank Governor Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe.
I can remember those days when there were kind of challenges, especially as a regulator our ability to intervene proactively and timely has been much more very important, and as well as the support and cooperation that we got from the management, the board of directors, is also equally important for us to address these kind of challenges. We all know banking has been a much more challenging, modern business, and obviously challenges and stresses are different with modern banking. As we see all over the world now, on daily basis we see a lot of even global banks. Now you see in USA, UK, even in the Europe, such challenges banks are facing. And this is where the even commercial banks are basically, they need to prepare and create the spaces to face any challenges in terms of liquidity, in terms of capital, and in terms of their ability to move fast, and in terms of their cooperation, and also as a regulator, how fast we can activate the facilities, how fast we can intervene. That's also important that we are already seeing in last week or so in global environment. This is kind of a normal situation that we are going to see. Especially in Sri Lanka, we have seen, we have had a lot of difficult situations, even in the recent past, as a result of the crisis that we have been going through, but we have been able to maintain a stability of the banking system with the support of the industry as well as our interventions and support that already mentioned. I think going forward also, I'm confident that we can maintain the same stability. That's part of is mainly one of our responsibility, and also mainly the responsibility of the board of directors, management, and the staff of all the commercial banks.
The Sri Lankan stocks closed high today, helped by gains in financial and consumer discretionary stocks. The all-share price index closed 0.25% higher at 9,419.35. The S&P SL20 index of more liquid stocks ended at 2,725.52, following a 0.09% gain. Trading volume for the SPI fell to 54.6 million shares from about 164.4 million in the previous session. The market's turnover fell to 1.9 billion Sri Lankan rupees or $5.94 million from 3.44 billion rupees in the previous session. Ceylon Tobacco Company PLC and Senkaragala Finance PLC were the top contributors to the index, rising 4.5% and 16.5% respectively. Foreign investors were net sellers in the equity market, offloading 720.7 million rupees worth of shares, while domestic investors were net buyers, purchasing stocks worth 1.78 billion rupees. Now let's take a look at how the Sri Lankan rupee traded against other major currencies during the day. Now oil prices fell sharply today amid declining European banking shares. Meanwhile, comments by US Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm that refilling country's strategic petroleum reserve may take several years dampen demand prospects. Brent crude fell $2.50 or 3.3% to $73.41 a barrel, while West Texas Intermediate US crude futures dived $2.47 at a 3.5% decline to $67.49 a barrel. Both benchmarks, which fell about 1% yesterday, were on track to end the week slightly higher after posting the biggest weekly declines in months last week due to banking sector turmoil and worries about a possible recession. The US dollar meanwhile closed stronger, rising 0.6% against other currencies, and a stronger greenback means crude is more expensive to holders of other currencies. Analysts point out that the lack of crude buying for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve represents a major blow to the oil demand outlook. The White House said in October it would buy back oil for the SPR when prices were at or below about $67 to $72 per barrel. But it would be difficult to take advantage of low prices this year to add to stockpiles which are currently at their lowest level since 1983, following sales directed by President Joe Biden last year. Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak said previously announced cut of 500,000 barrels per day in Russia's oil production would be from an output level of 10.2 million ppd in February. Now, Royal College Colombo claimed a 7-wicket victory against St Thomas's College, Mount Lavinia in the 46th annual limited overs cricket encounter played by the Mustangs Trophy. St Thomas's College won the toss and elected to bat first at the Sinhalese Sports Club ground today and managed to score a 165 in 48.2 overs. Senadi Bulankoloma scored 66 runs while Mahit Pereira scored 28. Royal College, however, passed the target in 37 overs, losing just 3 wickets. Rayan Peri scored 69 runs for the Royalists, while Uvindu Veerasekara scored 50. The Royalists also won the 144th Battle of the Blues, held from the 16th to the 18th of March, regaining the shield after 7 years. And that's all the news we have for this evening. Join us again tomorrow for the very latest news at the very same time. Stay tuned to our social media pages to stay updated on the very latest news. Have a pleasant evening and good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.